Welcome to the Birth Lounge podcast, an empowering space for expecting and new parents to hear candid conversations with experts, support your mental health, and learn the tips and tricks that thousands of parents have used to craft their ideal birth. We will answer all of your questions, the scary ones and the weird ones, to help calm your fears and feel confident going into your birth. I'm going to help you redefine what birth and motherhood looks like and how to embrace your journey. I've intentionally crafted a list of experts to help you navigate pregnancy, explore your birth options, and plan for postpartum so that it can be a time of soaking in your tiny human. We're going to go there on all the hard topics so that you can dive deep into finding your confidence and freeing yourself from fears around birth. With over 10 years of experience in family education and a master's degree in human development and family studies, I created this podcast as a way to share the resources parents need to make educated and informed decisions about their care in pregnancy and childbirth. This is a birth community driven by evidence-based information and research in hopes to help you explore your options, understand your rights, and know what choices you have along the way when it comes to birth and beyond. I'm your host, HeHe. Now let's get to the good stuff. Hello, have you heard about my completely free class that teaches you 6 evidence-based ways to avoid a C-section and reduce your tearing in labor by up to 50%? And remember, I mentioned it was completely free. This class is going to teach you how to advocate for your preferences in the birth room so that you can have a birth that's filled with joy and not birth trauma. Advocating for yourself starts with being empowered with the right information so that you can ask the right questions and confidently make decisions during labor based on what feels good to you and your baby. But here's the thing. The U.S. has one of the highest C-section rates in the world, and it is ever climbing year after year. And it's not because the system is broken, albeit it is, but it's really because women don't have the tools to navigate that broken system. We may not be able to change the system before you have your baby, but what we can do is change how you operate within that system. Change the conversations that you're having with your providers. Change the places that you are getting your information to help you have informed conversation with your doctor before you have your baby. I want to teach you how to do that. We know the reasons that our C-section rates are climbing. We know the reasons that inductions happen so often, and we know the reasons that babies end up in the NICU. I want to help you avoid all of that so that you can have a birth that you love. You can find my free class at thebirthlounge.com/C-section so that you can learn 6 evidence-based ways to avoid a C-section and reduce your tearing in labor. Again, that is thebirthlounge.com/C-section. See you there. Bye. Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Oh my gosh, today's episode is so good, but it is also so introspective. We're going to push you. We're going to challenge you. We're going to talk about things that you may have never thought about before. It may help you realize some things about yourself. It may help you venture into corners or crevices of yourself that you have never ventured into before. Do you know about the term reparenting yourself? Have you ever heard of this, this ideation of being able to reparent yourself? So I think in essence, it suggests that all of us reach a place in our life where we realize that as a small child, we had unmet needs. And I think this is pretty universal and it's pretty normal for all humans to have unmet needs in some regards. That's just part of the human experience. But reparenting yourself suggests that you can actually tap into the small child inside of us. And I think we all know, especially if you're a part of this community and have been for a minute, you know that I believe that we all have a small child inside of us that wants to be heard and seen and kept safe. I think you also may know from this community that the way that you were parented growing up has a lot to do with your parenting styles. It also has a lot to do with the limitations that you do or don't set on yourself. It has a lot to do with the narratives that circle in your brain every day. And it has a lot to do with what you picked up from the modeling that was around you when you were growing up. I'm so stoked to have on today's guest, Dr. Gertrude Lyons, who is a visionary leader in the realm of self mothering and holistic women's empowerment, and really transforming this deep relationship with yourself. She has over 25 years of experience, and she weaves together this really beautiful tapestry of wisdom and education and this holistic approach to creating an integrative experience for her client. Dr. Gertrude loves to guide women on this transformative journey to reclaim the art of mothering, to reclaim that voice that you may have lost. She's also the host of the podcast Rewrite the Mother Code, and she has a new book coming out, Rewrite the Mother Code From Sacrifice to Stardust. I'm so excited for you to hear all of her wisdom. So, if you have been feeling that nudge and that pull and that urge to go deeper in yourself, if you feel like through motherhood you've lost a piece of who you are, if you feel like there's a lot of times that that mother instinct, that mama bear voice is wanting to speak up, but she just doesn't for whatever reason. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's judgment, maybe you're just scared to actually speak up. Whatever it is for you, I promise you today, Dr. Gertrude is going to give you some life changing hacks. We are talking about how to deal with the fear of abandonment and that sense of overwhelm that usually accompanies motherhood. We're talking about therapy and the benefits of really being able to do introspective work. Plus, Dr. Gertrude's going to talk to us about what if you can't get your partner on board? What if they just absolutely will not go to therapy with you? They will not do the work, and you feel like you want to move beyond that. You want to do the work. Are you leaving your partner behind? We're going to talk about the abruptness of postpartum and how you can actually really slowly, sneakily, gradually lose yourself and what it looks like to come back from that. You guys, this episode was more than I could have ever dreamt up, and I'm so excited for you to hear it. So, without further ado, Dr. Gertrude, welcome to the show.
Oh, HeHe, I'm so delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. I think living a fuller, more purposeful life is something that we could all strive for, really living in that
Mm,
authentic part of ourselves and not feeling like we're always having to hold something back or keep some of ourselves reserved or put ourselves at expense of others, right? So
our
this is a
hair.
conversation that I think everybody listening is like, "Ooh, I need this." But before we dive into all that juicy life-changing
Sure.
stuff, can you give us a little bit of a background of what brought you to this work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, do we have hours? It's pretty much my life journey in many respects. But I'll summarize some highlights or key points, right? Because we don't, you know, you get out of college, you start your journey as an adult, and it takes you so many places, doesn't it? And certainly me graduating with a degree in finance and accounting and working for an economic analyst doesn't necessarily there's a lot that happened between that and what I'm doing now, and focusing on the coaching and the transformational opportunity and mothering. But there are always through lines. There's always things that happen in our lives. And I think for me, some key junctures to feel so passionate about what I'm doing now was when my husband and I got engaged and we started on our own growth journey, right? I had my, you know, economist boss was the one to say, okay, that's great that you're getting married, but I really recommend doing premarital counseling or coaching or therapy. At the time it was therapy. And, I'm 23 years old. This is 1989, right? I'm so happy so much more that is available. It's so much more, common than it was then. But took that risk. Somehow my husband said yes and went along with me, but it just opened that door to exploration, to, you know, looking at yourself, going and doing that healing, you know, looking at the patterns in your life, the blocks, all the stuff, right? All the stuff that we work on and in our personal development path. But, you know, along the way, we decided we wanted to have children. So that really launched me into the like, what is it? Oh my gosh, like it, you know, what is it? It looks really hard to create a path of my choosing. And I think had I not had this opening to question, to explore, to like actually tune in at least a little bit at that time to my intuitive self, you know, that was a valid place to look, I would have gone total traditional, like find the fanciest hospital for me and, you know, let's be done with it, right? Like just take my pain away, of course. Like what, you know, that isn't that how everyone does it, how it's supposed to be. Fortunately, you know, I was doing my work, had people in my life, and it just made sense to me. And I look back, I'm like, wow, like I'm so grateful that despite nobody like doing this around me, I chose home births for my daughters and found wonderful midwives, had, you know, the most transformative experience, beautiful, transcendent experiences. You know, if we end up talking about, you know, specifics about that, we can. So that was all great. I was like in my power, you know, all the work I had done up to that point was like there and there for me. You know, fast forward a year or so into the birth of my second daughter, and I it's like I lost it all. You know, I didn't lose it all, but what I lost was I was still parenting consciously. I was still in that space, but I lost myself. All right. So that's what became, you know, and I didn't even realize until looking back on it a bit later. Like I kind of knew it was happening, but all of the ways that I used to, you know, take risks in my relationship, rock the boat, you know, continue exploring into those depths of, you know, the unknown of our inner being. And, you know, two daughters in, I just got too scared. It was scary. You know, I felt like I wasn't willing to go there. And so for a chunk of raising my daughters, you know, it was, you know, all about them, kind of losing myself in them, you know, parenting, like I said, you know, and my husband partnered well. We parented pretty consciously. But later I realized like, wow, like even with all those tools available to me, even in a growth environment, I was working as a coach by then. I was director of a couples and parenting family program, right? I had gotten a master's degree in maximizing the potential in families. Like, you know, my head was working it. I kind of knew, but I was holding back, like doing the deeper work. So I realized, you know, that when my daughters were high schoolish and I started looking back and I'm like, wow, that was so hard for me. What's it like for other women? And like, I knew from women I coached, I knew from people around me that when they stuck with that work of that, keeping themselves in the picture, that really beautiful things happened, you know? So that's what sent me on my doctoral journey was to explore that and really look at how do we raise women's awareness, people's awareness to this opportunity and what are all the things that get in the way, right? And what are some of the signs? What are some of the things that we can look for? And then how do we, you know, keep going and move past them? So that was a really beautiful journey. So that launched me into the work I'm doing now. It's kind of branded or whatever the umbrella is called, rewriting the mother code, because that's really what we're doing, right? We're exploring, we're looking at like what are the beliefs in our culture, what are the beliefs that we're wired with from our family that limit us. There's some good ones, there's some, you know, some good stuff out there, but there's a lot that limit us, and until we start tuning our attention to it, we don't even know, right? So that's where I am. That's how I got to be doing what I'm doing and excited to keep doing it.
I love that. So your background to me feels like these kind of unexpected puzzle pieces that just happen to all fit together. But I think you and I
Mhm.
both know it's not just happened to. It was a very specific and like already written for you thing. My
Mhm.
background is much like that too. When you look at the pieces individually, you're like, how did these things go together? And then once you see the full picture, you're like, wow, this is so incredible and like gives such a unique perspective. And I think that's what draws me to your work is just how, I don't want to say niche, but just very specific. Like you are helping women do transformational work that not a lot of people are out there doing, and not a lot of people are talking about it. So thank you. I just wanted to start with
Uh,
like, thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here and sharing your story and your wisdom. I didn't know those things about your home births, but we will circle back to that because I can't pass up a
I
good
know we
home
can't help
birth
ourselves,
story. I
right?
gotta hear those. But I do want to start at the start of your story, talking
Sure.
about therapy. You said that you guys had done this before the 90s. There must have been taboo around what it meant to go to therapy and the optics around that because,
Mhm.
you know, we've gotten much better at it today, but there's still this optic of like, is something wrong with you?
Mhm.
What's going on in their life that they need therapy? I think that's obviously much less these days, but the taboo exists. Talk to us about what it was like back then.
Sure.
What was the culture around therapy, and then how did you and your husband navigate that, I guess, socially?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was, sometimes I do look back and I'm surprised, like, how did we do that? But I'll tell you, like, I think a couple of the things that came to mind because I was really annoyed actually with my boss. Like, I come in all excited that I got engaged, and he's like, well, I recommend premarital, counseling or therapy. I'm like, well, buzzkill, right?
Yeah, womp womp. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Um,
Yeah.
But something clicked with me, and this is where, like listening to just those like little whispers or voices and taking some action on them, which is something I, really support people I work with to do. It's because it like didn't make sense in some ways, but then, we start putting our brain even first to it. And it's like, wow, if I, you know, I, we're in love, things are great. I found this amazing catch. Like, what could go wrong? Right. But I had a little bit of insight to consider looking at our parents' marriages. Right.
Mm,
And, immediate red flags. Right. So, his family, his mom was in a second marriage, married to another alcoholic. He, was the oldest son, had, had to take care of everyone and everything. And that's those situations. I My parents weren't divorced yet, but they basically lived separate lives. I didn't see anything modeled remotely of a couple like liked each other.
mm,
They didn't, they kind of did family, but there was a lot there. They ended up getting divorced a couple years later, but we're living in separate bedrooms by then. They were like roommates, so that was kind of insight number one. It's like, huh, like if that was my modeling, if that's what I was with 24/7, we were with, in our whole upbringings, I don't want that, right? So it was a little reactive, like, how do we not have that? Maybe somebody can help us, avoid the outcomes that we were a part of, through our whole lives. And so I started feeling like, yeah, let's try this. And then I wrote my husband a letter, right? Like we didn't have email back then. We didn't, you didn't have texting. So literally a handwritten letter says something about our communication, right? I couldn't just have the conversation. I had to get it in writing and why I thought this might be a good thing for us. And, you know, it'll help with our communication. There's things we should probably look at. I wasn't even mentioning the already red flags that were there about things that had happened in our relationship, pre getting engaged, but close to it. So I'm like, yeah, he he put up a bit, he definitely put up some resistance, right? He's like, what do we like, what's your boss telling us we should go? Why should we listen to him? Do you have skeletons in your closet? You're too afraid to tell me. So that like first hurdle, he's like, but God bless him. He's like, let's we'll try. We can always go once. We hate it, we don't do it. So we did. And I remember a number of things very clearly from that. I actually remember what I was wearing, but more, having somebody just sit down with you and you share a little bit about your families, and then they kind of proceed to tell you, like, wow, you probably experienced this or have had these kind of challenges because of, what you shared with me about your families. And we were both like, how do you know this? Like, we had never experienced anything like that, being seen, being, sharing something vulnerable or like telling a little bit of truth about your family and then having somebody reflect it in a way that like it wasn't your fault. Like this isn't, it's okay to look at this. We were like, okay, we're in. Like it didn't really take much else than that, and then everybody was, it's funny. I don't remember like I don't think we broadcast it broadly, like tell everybody we were doing this, but our families were kind of curious. We started making decisions about the wedding and things like that based on things that we wanted. So there were things that were coming out of it that they weren't too happy about, thinking for ourselves and not just trying to take care of our mothers kind of thing. From the start, it was clear that I was the one initially that had like, the most issues with my mom. So sure, I'll kind of dig in on myself. And that was something that I really appreciated that this first therapist said was, this is great. Let's set a vision for your wedding, for your marriage. But then really the best thing you can do for your couple is do your own individual work. And, couples work isn't really gonna, it's okay. It'll be good, but you then really need to focus on your own growth and development, which is what we did. And then we've kind of had that part of our lives in some form or another, kind of went from therapy to coaching. And then I got into it professionally, like just to like, name those things. So I don't know. We just kind of held fast because we were feeling better. Like we were feeling, and so I think that was the big thing that got us over the humps of like the judgments, the like, what's wrong? We're like, well, at the time we could say like, well, nothing's wrong with us, but our families, there's some serious problems there. But then eventually it all comes back to you, right? It's like, well, and then how did I deal with that? And what are, the mechanisms that are, hindering me because of how we come up with coping mechanisms and deal
Yeah.
with this stuff. But as far as then having a connection and closeness to my husband, nothing could have been better. And I think that set us up to then when we did decide to have kids, because we got married young. We were 24, 25. So we waited like 6 years before we had our first child. So it gave us a chance to like kind of grow up a little bit and grow, so to speak, and before we started on that journey.
Wow. You mentioned letter writing, and it's so funny
Mhm.
because I am like the queen of letters. It is the
Oh.
best way for me to get out whatever I'm feeling. And I don't always give them, actually, rarely do I give them to the people that I write them to. But
Mhm.
if I'm really stuck in something,
Yep.
oh my gosh, I will write until my hand falls off. So it's just so funny. There's so many times my husband and I have been together for 11 years, and
Congratulations.
thank you. We just got married last year,
Mhm.
actually. So we just hit our 1 year mark of marriage.
Beautiful.
But there were so many years in the beginning when I would write a letter to get everything out in an articulate
Mhm.
way and give it to him. And so that's hilarious to hear you say the same thing. Okay, you also mentioned the mother wound.
Mm,
Tell us about that. That must be something that you see constant with people who are trying to almost reparent themselves and learn how to
sure.
like be a new version of themselves. I'd love to hear what it looks like in women and then also how it manifests in men.
Yeah, I love the term. Uh, Bethany Webster, I kind of credit her, for the mother. I don't know that she coined mother wound, but I know she's
Okay.
done a ton of beautiful work around the mother wound.
I learned about it
And
on TikTok. Yeah,
well,
so I
she has
didn't learn
spread,
about
like it
it.
has spread, but I think
Okay.
she's one of the OGs in it, I have to say.
Nice. Okay.
And I love that it's, been specifically named because it is, I mean, I've kind of grown from a like mother wound being the like, the bad stuff your mother did to you that kind of messed you up, which there's truth to, right? Like I'll say a little bit more about that later and the impact of that, on me to just the whole process. And I write the first time I really got clear on this was I shared with you that I'm just wrote my first book that'll be coming out in May 6th. Rewrite the Mother Code is that, my journey into this world was through in my mother's womb and through her birth canal, right? And that just that right there, like her wounds, I was in them, I was a part of them, they touched me, in that way. And she had some just significant trauma. And I just, imagine that and picture that. Like I'm coming through this birth canal that had experienced rape, that had experienced some really traumatic things. And that was my home. That's where I got started. And so I believe, that the echoes of that reverberates in us, these generations of trauma are woven into our DNA and then, experience us. So you kind of that's the start of a relationship. I also know she really wanted me, she really wanted us. She was really hoping for a girl, which I was. My brother, she had a boy first. And, all of that's in there, right? So it isn't just this kind of traumatic bad stuff, this bad stuff, but, the weight of that is in there. And until, we start looking at ourselves and look at like what, where did how she live her life? Where did how the choices she made and the experiences she had, how did those impact me? They impacted me in the ways she mothered me, just in the way maybe she held me the first time she held me, that some of that, both that joy, but also that, lack of self-esteem that I would equate to my mom, and really not trusting herself and some of the anxiousness, all of that is in there. And, when I came to study this work and look at, women and this transformational opportunity and motherhood and what happens to us and stuff, I'd have to go back. Maybe I'll do that for your show notes and find the specific book. But this woman set out, she's like, that was, what she was going to research and study is women's experiences, in motherhood, their motherhood experiences from, giving birth onward. But she's like, I'd sit down with all of them and all they could talk about was their mother, and all they could talk about was, what they were experienced vis-a-vis their mother. So she just really saw how impactful, that relationship is. And, when we can step aside with, taking personal responsibility from a standpoint of just wanting to discover for ourselves, may have moments of blame, may have moments of, "Oh, I hate you and I wish you had done it differently," that we can then, transform into like, wow, and see them as people, but understand that it still had an impact on me. And the feelings I have about it are real, they're valid. I need to have them, I need to work through them and heal, from these experiences. And I think that's where it's a gift, right? Like I don't wish trauma, I don't wish, some of the extreme experiences that children have with their mother or parents, primary caregivers on anyone, but they are what make us who we are, right? And when we can get and have access to, therapy, deep work that we can do to heal that, and make sense of our story, none of that has to hold us back, right? That's when we then really have choice, right? We're not
Yeah.
sitting there blaming mom for like, why I can't have this or why I can't do that. Um, that should be a short-lived phase of your healing journey. So I hope that answered it, at least for the women part. But it kind of, I can jump right into it. It's the same for men, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
men, you know, they have a different experience. Like they have points in their life where they have to realize like they're not mom. We get to kind of emulate that woman or see ourselves in her. They have to at some point realize like, oh, I'm not her, and have can sometimes be easy, but their own challenges in separating and individuating from mother, from mom. But for me, like watching my husband do that work with his mom, really brought us so much closer together, and it was really beautiful to see that. I mean, I super appreciate it too, to peel himself away from kind of the ways he felt like he had to, take care of her and become the man of the family and, work through all of that for himself. And until he could kind of create that distance, like, you know, I was either, and we become this for each other, right? I was either the mom projection that he lived, there were ways that I just would become his mother. And so I'd get
Mhm.
like the brunt of it. But also, that he could bring his attention and his full sense of himself to me, to our relationship. And that didn't happen overnight. That took some years of work and, and some pretty deep healing on both of our parts. So I'm hoping
Yeah.
that kind of gives a good foundation for what that is.
Yeah, for sure. I have read the book Mother Hunger, and it's really good, you guys,
Mm,
by I don't know, Kelly McDaniel, is that right? McDaniel is
I have
definitely
to
the
be
last
sure.
name. I think
Yeah.
it may be Kelly is the first name, but it's really good. It's like a purple book if you're looking at it. It's good. That is one of the first books I read after learning about it on TikTok. So I had learned about it on TikTok and I thought, "Oh my gosh, this is the way that this creator had explain it was like basically everyone has some sort of mother wound. And so as a doula, I'm
Hmm.
always thinking, how can I understand my clients deeper? How can I understand? How can I tap into those fears and those limitations and the things that they don't even know that they have, and help educate them like, hey, this may be something, see if it's applicable to you. And so I thought, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, how many people could use this work before they had their babies? And so that's what set me on that journey of the mother wound, and it is true that so many of us have it, and it does
Yeah.
absolutely impact the way that you show up in your relationships and for yourself and as a parent, as a mother, as a community member, all of it.
Yeah, here, and I'll just underline he because you said that, most of us have it. I would say all of us have it. It's just on a
Yeah.
continuum, right?
Yeah.
How deep is that wound? How is it? And I say that, for ourselves, but also like if you are mothering a child, you'll never do it perfectly. My husband and I would joke like, yeah, people set up college funds, we'll set up a therapy fund,
Yeah.
even with you know, the best intentions, they're unique beings and we can't and won't do it perfectly. And, they'll have their own wounds from, me, me as mother, right? I
Do you
didn't
think
like that
that's
at
how it
first. I
works?
kind of hated that. It's like,
You
no,
didn't
I'm
like
gonna,
what?
well, I didn't like that, like that someday they were going to not like, they were going to have things to say, to me and, things that I both didn't like it and like it, but there's always this part. And I think it's natural, we want to do the best we can. We don't want to intentionally hurt our children or cause them, any difficulties. And we just can't. And I think the more we can free ourselves from that, mistaken belief that we can somehow do it. That's such a, you know, fictional goal that so many
Mm-hmm.
of us set ourselves
Unrealistic.
up with, right? Unrealistic, just not possible.
Mm.
We'll never meet it. So we'll always feel like, we're doing a crappy job because you can't do that. So to have that compassion and grace for ourselves, and it doesn't mean we still don't, do our best, right? And I think what I've come to realize too, he and this is I think they sense when you're even trying, right? Like, if you're on the path and working on it, it's like if you catch yourself in a pattern that isn't right and you go get some support for that, I think that's just as valuable as, the once you actually, maybe do change your behavior, the being in the process of changing behaviors and having that intention, I think goes a long, long way. You're modeling, right? We're modeling for them like, oh, here's something I got feedback from you and yeah, I don't like that either. And that's something I want to work on because I think kids are one of their purposes is to like just mirror for us our unfinished business and our work, So, and I love what you said earlier too, like starting this before you have kids, before you're in the heat of it, if you can have, some experience in that growth environment and what it looks like to explore, these arenas, then it's not quite so, you know, confrontive when you decide to do it in the midst of it all. Because it's,
Yeah.
Maybe
Because
more
it's coming
challenge.
up regardless. I
Yeah,
love
but
how
it's
you
coming
point that up.
up.
You point that out.
Yeah.
It's like you can deal with it now or you can deal with it later. And that ultimately is why I have stuck with therapy so long, is because it is coming up regardless. So if I'm not doing it now, I've got to do it later in life. And my
Hmm.
personality is just like, let's get this shit over with so that we can go lay on the beach. So I'm ready to just do the hard work and dig deep. And I have, and it feels good now to be in what I call like a maintenance era where we're just like kind of touching base and we're just keeping up. But I know that life changes bring exactly that changes, right? And so I
Yeah.
think it's something that even listeners, if you are in a good spot right now, that may change. And not to say that to scare you, but to say you're not doing anything wrong or you didn't cause anything to happen
Hmm.
if things in your life start to not feel so, I don't know, glamorous and luxurious and relaxing and easy and that flow
Hmm.
era, right? That just feels good. There will be times where you're just out of flow, and that's okay, and you can get back there.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love how you said that. He, it's, and enjoy those times, right? It's like,
Yeah.
sometimes calms before storms or like, wow, things are really good right now. And I don't need to stir up trouble, or like go looking for it. But maybe this is a time I can, look at something or set a vision for myself or kind of look ahead at, how do I want things to be? And sometimes that's where coaching can help versus therapy, and just making that decision. Coaching, like I don't, I'm not working on any, really deep emotional or trauma type things right now, but hmm, you know, maybe I can work on a vision for myself, and look at what are, how do I want this to look? What'll make me happy? What does it look like to have more? Because I think sometimes we don't even know until we start looking like this is great. I don't need more. And it's like, well, but if I were, what might that be, or, a deeper level of what I already have. So I love what you're saying there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I feel like all the like I just feel jazziness in my body. It's just like a little electricity. Okay, so you had mentioned losing yourself in motherhood, and I think that we could all use tips on like how to let this happen, but I
Mm.
do want to point out that it's usually very gradual. This is not
Mhm.
necessarily an overnight thing. Now, postpartum, going from like pregnancy to having a baby happens overnight. That's abrupt, but you're prepared for that. What
Yeah.
I find that is so fascinating to me is that nobody is prepared to pick up on the patterns that start to indicate, hey, you are slipping away. You are letting yourself be on the back burner and
Mhm.
almost like wither away to nothing, right? So, talk to
Yeah.
us about what that looks like in our life. How can you pick up on those patterns, recognize them, and then stop them in their tracks? And then, for people who are like me, where we are just now thinking about kind of building our family, so not pregnant, don't have children, what can we do now before our
Mhm.
babies get here? Or maybe even for people in pregnancy, like before your baby gets here, how can we start to put down foundations that will help us avoid really losing ourselves in this process?
Yeah. It's such a great question. And I love that you're asking it because it's just not something we're, taught, trained, or, kind of in the
Hmm.
atmosphere to think about. And, so much gets, so much energy, focus gets put on conception, pregnancy, and birth, and a bit, like you said, of new motherhood, what that like first postpartum is going to be like. And so little on the whole journey, right? And then you just parent them, and you just raise them. And it's kind of like you have this main event, and it's the show, but really then that whole journey is what you're talking about. And how do we stay true to ourselves and stay with what, and like I mentioned about my own personal journey, right? So one of the things that I always say, kind of, and we were talking about it leading up to this question is, having a foundation, having done personal work, done transformative work, you know, and really knowing what it's like to look at deep wounds and heal them is some of the best training we can do. Like if you figure, you're training for a marathon, like, to just suddenly like go in there and do it, having not looked at like, how does my body respond? How do I respond to these different, stimuli, phases, the impact that, running these miles over time has that where, I may have felt great in the beginning, but as, the impact on my body of like years to come. And I'm saying body kind of metaphorically, on everything that, you know, we we have some sense or idea, where then we might have a little bit more of an inkling to catch it, right? So having missed some of the signals myself, I can look back retrospectively and look at it. And, I would say, even though I was kind of naming that after my second daughter was born, I felt, a sense of overwhelm that really never hit me with my first daughter. But with her, this overwhelm and then sudden, like I felt like, when I look back on it, fear of abandonment, right? That so I like named some of those things at the time versus like, oh, let me just go back to the fear of abandonment and then we'll pick up from there. But when we can like have a moment to like step back and notice a shift in our behavior, like, gee, isn't it interesting? I was so gung ho about us, digging in deeply and working. I've really backed off on that. I wonder why that is, and questioning ourselves and then having the courage to like bring that into a coaching or therapy setting, right? And explore it. If I had just named in that moment, like, geez, I'm so much more afraid to like, keep going down this road because now I have two babies. Worst fear, I'm going to get cast, thrown out of the house. Things that weren't even plausible, but maybe I had, some generational like things to work on from that perspective. So there's one just really tuning into that intuitive voice and continuing to listen to her or, or him and have people in your lives like I had people set up early on, that knew me, knew what I wanted. Like when you make a birth plan, right? Like they know what you want. You're really going to try and adhere to it as best as you can. But you have your spouse, you have your doula, the midwife, the people in your circle, like know. And that's where a vision for yourself really comes in handy, right? And then you share that. Like and this is something I didn't do that I do when I'm working with moms now is like, what is this vision for yourself? Okay, now you have the baby, now you're here, and now you see these years ahead, and we can break it down and look at like, how do you want to be, and how do you see yourself continuing to learn and grow in these processes? And then, there's people looking out for you because we can't trust ourselves. I was able to trust myself up to a point, but I had needed to make it really apparent to people around me, like, look for these signs, look for this or that, or if you notice me not keeping up on my growth work, say something, and have those kinds of friends or people in your life that are willing to do that. And I think that is something that's very new in the environment, and I work with moms. This is something that has helped them and the women that I've seen continue on that path and work with it. It's by doing this that they have succeeded, and they've, oh my gosh, like some of them and the deep stuff that they would hit at different junctures of their child's life, because you're constantly giving birth, right? Every transition of them and their lives is a new birthing. It's a new letting go, right? And that's going to stir stuff up for you. And what does that look like? So I know
Mm.
that still may have been a little general, but hopefully that gives you an idea or a sense.
No, that was great. And it's so wonderful to hear you say that you recommend having those people because one of our little tips that we tell people in order to prepare for postpartum is to create a document of important names and numbers and just keep it handy. We used to tell people like put it on your fridge, but you don't have to. You can keep it wherever you want. But on there is a section of people who, when you feel like you are not necessarily yourself, you can go to these people and say, things are weird. Things are just really too hard. I am struggling. I'm not really happy. And they will be able to kind of get you back on the straight and narrow. And we tell people, think about it now while you're pregnant. Think about the people in your sphere that you're safe to go to, that you feel hurt, that they make you feel seen, that, they give you good, solid advice and they don't ever judge you for your choices. Hopefully, you have these types of people in your life, and these can be your anchors that can kind of bring you back. And so, I've never thought about employing that in other places in life, but it makes so much sense that immediate postpartum is not the only place. You can do it spiritually, you can do it
Mhm.
with your friends, you can do it just with accountability partners. That's really a cool idea.
Yeah. No, thank you. And it ties together how, even before we're thinking about having a child and inviting a child, to a spirit to, I believe, we can invite, that soul, that spirit, into our lives. How we're living impacts that being, right? How we're already modeling for that being, that potential of a being, even before they become a reality, right? Even before conception. Studies have been showing that. Like I just think that's so miraculous, but so cool because it relates to the whole like, if we get a little more out there, we are all connected. We aren't these separate little units living our own little separate lives, right? We are connected, and the impact of how I live my life impacts the people around me and the potential people in my life. And then that carries forward, right? So how do we keep that going when we've had a big shift in our life, like bringing a child,
Mm.
into it, into our atmosphere and into our sphere and all that entails, that it gets to be the through line, through all of it. And that vision if I'd had people, that I had named, like, here's my vision. I want to keep learning and growing. I want, to use this experience to really like keep digging in and see what I discover. Um, and no, I know I'm going to lose my way. I know it's going to throw me at some point. So here, I'm giving you this directive, and I won't like you when you give it to me. Just know ahead of time. I'll probably resist you. I'll probably be like, what are you talking about? I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I'm going to try and talk you out of it. So, be warned that you're really going to have to, because, those old paradigms, the way our culture is set up for women to give themselves over, people, caregivers, give themselves over to the child and start putting themselves last. Even if you had done a decent job leading up to there, you know, our culture and our American culture is set up like that is your purpose, that's your job. Bad you if you stray from that. So, there's a lot to overcome. So we're kind of in for it. But if we can set ourselves up for that, I hate to call it a battle, but it kind of is, right? Like we don't have as much working in our favor to be on our own side and put our needs first, really ultimately, then everybody is better off, right? Like I don't mean narcissistic selfishness, obviously, right? We're talking about like just deep self-care, and
Yeah,
making it a
just
priority.
not letting motherhood completely deplete you until you're nothing. Because if you're nothing, then you can't serve the people around you. And that's
Mhm.
what you want to do so deeply, right? That's probably why you became a mom, is because you want to just love on your family so deeply. But
Mm.
if if you allow it to kind of, deplete you. then
Yeah,
you won't, there'll be nothing left of you to give. Can we keep on that topic of
for sure.
limitations and objections that you hear? So I imagine there's a lot of my best friends out there listening, and everyone probably has a yeah, but in their
Mhm.
head. So can you combat a couple of those most common, like, yeah, buts, where people write off that, oh, but not me, or,
Mm.
I probably don't need this. Like, I got plenty of people in my life that I could think that needs this, but not me. What are you hearing? And then how do we rewrite those yeah, but sentences in our head to help us feel okay and confident in putting
Mhm.
ourselves first?
No, that's such a great question, Hehe. And at first, my first thought was like, well, usually when people come to me, they know that they have something, they want to like look at or focus on. But then I remembered that I will have experiences where, a new mother or someone who's, looking at their mothering experience will come in and they'll talk about some of the things like maybe are an issue, and then I'll start talking to them about what they could do or that, and then they just like take it all. It's like, well, no, it's actually not really that
Yeah.
bad, or and because I think once we like name something like that, he or name something, um, it takes courage to name something that we're not necessarily proud of, or even if it's not proud of, we kind of have an inkling we know could be better, or, I would like to consider doing differently. The minute we say that or are willing to say that, then we also then feel like we have to do something about it. If I put that out there, then somebody's might hold me to it, or geez, once I said it out loud. So that's kind of a first step to get over is realizing that we even have that, that mechanism, that kind of on-off switch, that fear to just kind of keep everything like good, it's all good. We're good because I believe that all of us, subconscious, I listened to one of your episodes, like under the iceberg, kind of stuff, the stuff we don't see in our subconscious, it's powerful and it's moving us, but we're doing everything we can to just like hold that 10% as our reality, what we know and what we see, because this is all unknown and we have to honor that fear of like what's under the surface. And I think so often we'll build up a tremendous amount of, imagine fear about what that journey might look like, or imagine fear of if I name that, like, oh, like all these like terrible things are going to come flying out, and it's all just going to get bad, right? We have unconscious mechanisms in our brains trying to keep us safe, right? So our brain is just wants us to like, stay alive, be safe. It doesn't really like when we rock the boat. So when we one just can have that awareness, and then create a safe environment. Like I tell the women I'm coaching, your secret safe with me. Anything that you say in here as a possibility of something you might want more of, or you've seen so and so have this, in their relationship, and gee, if truth be told, I wouldn't mind some of that, or what that could look like. You don't have to do anything about it, and I think giving ourselves that okayness, it opens a whole huge door, right? And I find usually once people have that safety and they can let themselves dream a little bit more, and it might be like, things really are pretty decent and fine, but dare I say I want more, is that even okay? That goes against the rules, because if I have it this good, geez, isn't that like all uber selfish of me to to say I want more from my partner, or I want, you know, some time alone above and beyond what I already have because I want to do this, and things like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I think The objections I hear are like, I don't have the time, and I believe that you'll make time for the things that matter to you, and it's okay if it's not a priority for you right now. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
be. I mean, I think that's where a lot of the guilt comes in is like, oh, well, I should be doing this. You don't have to. You will
No.
eventually get to a place in life where you realize you need it and you can't make it to the next step in life, or you can't make it to that next kind of version of yourself or the
Mhm.
next place in your mothering that you want to be without doing something different. So it's okay if that's not a priority for you. I also hear people say, like, what if my husband won't go to therapy? I don't want people to think that I'm weird or I have mental health
Mhm.
issues or that something's wrong with me or that I'm a bad mother, right? There's so many objections that people have. And,
Goodness.
you know, I think about it a little bit like I think about trauma. That is just part of the human experience. We all have differing amounts and we all get dealt different types, but having to figure it out and having to balance things and having to choose and prioritize, that is not unique to you. It's just part of the human experience. So if you're feeling super
So true.
overwhelmed with it, you know, ask people in your life how they managed it. Everyone is managing it
Mhm.
differently, and so you might be able to pick up some tips and tricks that make it easier for you. Limitations are all around us, and
No. Oh my
they're
gosh,
never going away.
they're never going away, and neither are people's judgments. And
Ah,
neither, and when you said that, the stigma of the things and people's judgments, when we can start, I realize this came up real big. My husband and I, we decided in our 20s also, like a few years into marriage and doing our work, to stop drinking. So just stop drinking alcohol because we realized, well, he can't, we both come from alcoholic systems. I mean, there were logical, reasons for that, but mostly we wanted to be more conscious. But that was not our social circles, right? Like, and that was hard. Like,
mm,
the judgments of that and like, and people still trying to like ply you with alcohol, and it was really hard at first. And it took some time to just realize like, oh, I'm just, now that I've made this choice, that's just creating a ripple effect. Like it's stirring something up for people. That's theirs. Like when I could start separating, what their judgments and where they were coming from and be okay with because I had doubts at the beginning too, like, you know, yeah, this is weird, and I I miss it, or like maybe I don't know about this decision. The more we get settled with our own and feel like, this is just the best thing for me, and I don't have judgments of you. So sure, say whatever you want, but it can take some working through to get there. But I did realize that once I started, the more I felt like I was kind of in my own skin with it and okay with however people reacted, people stopped reacting. I mean, that's what was really interesting. He is like, suddenly, like, people are just like, oh, okay, no big deal. Great for you. Like, oh, I'd love to do that, but yeah, I'm not, it just wasn't a thing. And I think
yeah.
once you've had that experience, you realize that can translate into other experiences. Because, oh, yeah. Well, not that we have to go there, but it certainly came up when my husband and I decided to have a home birth,
Oh yeah. Tell us about that.
in 1996, first with family, like, Rich's, my husband's mom, coming out with the like, well, so and so, if they hadn't been in a hospital, like just all these horror stories of why you have to be in a hospital because you're going to die at home.
Nothing
They
has
had,
changed. Nothing has
right?
changed
Nothing.
about the
I know.
conversations people face.
Oh gosh, I know. And so I think because we had such a big experience with the alcohol, honestly, and something that was so popular and so like in the zeitgeist, that when we did make that choice, and two things I would say about that, like, you know, we I when I first heard about home birth from this crazy economic boss, like he helped me in two big regards: premarital coaching, and then he and his wife had two children with home births. Like if you met him, like he's so analytical, so like left brain, it's ridiculous. But, he also saw the positives in it. He could make sense of it. Well, side note, as an economist, we did personal injury and wrongful death work in a broad spectrum of people. He was the economist, like helping people, decide what they could ask for remuneration in these issues. And we saw our fair share of medical malpractice and, maternal and infant mortality. So I
Even back
kind of,
in 96.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I had that little inkling, and then his such positive experience. The minute I heard I could have my choice and I could eat food and that wasn't going to be taken primal things, right? Lighting and food and, an agency, like those were like the thing that got me thinking about it. But we did our research, back then we looked at hospital, midwife, a whole bunch of things, but we also didn't tell people we were pregnant for, honestly, we kept that circle really small for the first really 3 months, like first trimester, not because we were afraid of people, like if we lost the child, we didn't want people to know. It was really, we knew we were going to get inundated, that we were even thinking about this. We need to get really solid in our choice before we opened it up to what everyone was going to say about it, and I think that helped us a ton. I think that really gave us solid footing on that choice. And I mean, I could not be happier. And I didn't even know how much to appreciate the experience until I then attended just as a support person, not fully trained doula, but as a support person in probably 8 other births, that all of which ended up happening in the hospital. I'm like, oh my God. Like I didn't even know how lucky to consider myself to have had this, lucky, whatever, blessed to have the experiences that I did in a home birth, and then to go into even some of the best circumstances in a hospital atmosphere. There's just things you don't have choice over that, kind of broke my heart a little bit. So, and
Yeah.
they were, I think some of the also doing the work that we had done allowed me to be as present, and embrace pain. I mean, that's something have worked with from the start of my work with women and wanting to kind of raise women's awareness is shifting what pain means to us and the whole pain paradigm. So having had a foothold in that at least also made a huge difference. It's like, I'm not trying to avoid the pain, I'm embracing it as best I can. And one of the reasons I'm going to have a home birth is I know I'll probably, I don't have the choice. I don't mind that choice being taken away from me. I'm making the choice personally to have that choice removed from, unless I have to for some reason. So if there's any, if you have any other thoughts or questions about that, I'm happy to, share more details. But I think the question about, how even back then, you do that it really is being clear and sure for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, it hasn't changed.
No.
The home birth rate in the US is less than 10%, well less than 10%. It may be less than 5% across the whole US. So the taboo is still there. The
Yeah.
conversations of, oh my God, well, so and so would have died or their baby wouldn't be here if they weren't in a hospital still exist. The fear mongering. One thing you didn't mention was fear mongering from the hospital system, which
Yeah.
does happen here. And so there's a lot when it comes to home birth, even though, just like your economic boss, we know that there are benefits. We know that stats are better. We know that birth
Mm-hmm.
trauma is less. We know that it helps avoid unnecessary inductions and unnecessary C-sections. We know these things. That
Mm-hmm.
the economics are there, but we don't do it. And so
Well,
that's really
yeah.
interesting for me to hear that back in 1996. I was 5 then. I wouldn't have known. And I was born in the hospital. My sister was born in the hospital. So it is very interesting to hear
Same.
that not much has changed.
I know. Well, I'm like, it's sad. I mean,
Yeah.
and in some ways it's gotten even harder, the
Mm-hmm.
midwives that I worked with and I'm still really close with one of them, and we do work together. I support her. She trains midwives and doulas, and I do my piece, and she continues to midwife me, but she feels, I give her a lot too. But, she was the first to get a freestanding birth center in Illinois, like she just keeps advocating, and it's just some new hard thing, comes up to kind of keep going. And I'm so grateful, for the people, the women who stay at it, that this, becomes, because it's something we touched on at the beginning. I think it's, I'm going to use this word like a masculine dominated culture, but when I say masculine, I mean masculine values, like a left brain kind of yan, of the yin yang symbol. It's not like it's purposely trying to harm us. Like it thinks that it's, you know, a good thing to try and hurry along a process, to follow to get formulas for things and follow and once we stop honoring a natural process, a more feminine come from, and that things can unfold. We can be in the unknown for a little bit. We can sit with something that in this moment might not look so good, but let's give it some space before we make a move is, how why we've been birthing for as long as we have, and why you know, if we could just see that those technologies can just wait in the wings if and when a birth becomes a medical event instead of a natural process, then I think would be great. And that's when masculine and feminine can really work together, right? That's when we can partner versus, dominate and try and act like this, because it's not working, like you said, our the US has the highest, pregnancy and maternal death rate of any developed country. Like people don't believe me when I say that. I shared that with a young man, and he's like, I don't believe her statistics. Like that's just not true. And I'm like, well, I have no problem you going to look that one up because it's everywhere.
That's true.
And
It is very much
it's true.
true.
Like, how can we have this much technology, this much, and, you know, professionalization and technology and have worse outcomes? It's doesn't that should, but that's where profit comes, that's where we, well, that's okay. We'll forget about that when it comes to something being a moneymaker. That takes us on a
Yeah.
whole other tangent we don't have to go down, but
Well, it also shows that birth is different than every other department in the hospital. Other people are there because you're sick, because your body's not
yeah,
working, because you do need medical support.
absolutely.
Birth is not like that, except for the subset of people who have high risk deliveries or need to be in the hospital. But the majority of births, you're not sick. Your body
Mhm.
is working. You don't need medical support in terms of needing to be in the hospital. That's why you have a midwife, a
Yeah.
home birth midwife. And so for me, when people think about, or I guess when I have the conversations about like having home births versus like, oh my God, what will you do in an emergency? It's like, but the likelihood of an emergency happening in a low risk birth that hasn't been messed with is very low. And that's why it's not a
Mhm.
medical event. I love that you talked about the risk of having a home birth and you took those on willingly, and that is what made you feel safe. I think there's often this
Yeah.
idea that, oh my gosh, well, if you knew the risk of home birth, you would never choose that. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, which I've been able to witness over the last decade, is if you knew the risk of a hospital birth,
Mm,
you would never choose that.
mm.
That is, that's the truth for so
The
many
truth.
people. And I think a lot of times we walk into birth really blind, and that leads us into walking into motherhood kind of blind.
Oh my gosh, you just hit my like, what I think is the heart of this. He
Yeah.
is without that empowerment, without, that mother being empowered for her autonomy, her choices, her, seeing that she can do this hard thing, right?
Mm.
Like you don't think you can, but then you do. And uh, that sets a blueprint, right? Like, and when you're not looking just outside yourself for external validation, we're not, out of our fear. We're trained in our culture that when we're afraid, look at, someone outside me knows, what is best for me. And that is sometimes the case, but often we know exactly what we need. And that's, the midwives I had anyway, supported me to keep like, what's your body telling you? Just you'll see you'll do the next thing you're supposed to do. And there were times I'm like, tell me what to do. I'm scared. But then when that thing would happen and I could do it, each one of those junctures and to have that experience for myself, I think then does set a trajectory. And I think that's where we're disempowering, you know, birthing persons, people who are giving birth right from the get-go. And and when I say like, well, why is it harder like later on to keep this going, in motherhood, if we're already starting having not had that experience of our autonomy and agency, we're not even going to look for it later. We're just going to, kind of follow the same kind of pattern that and take what, we're told, whether it's medically, emotionally, psychologically as well, the trained expert, they know, they've worked on it and stop listening to our own inner voice. And that's what we want to keep going with, right? Like we want to keep, well, and I don't know if we've named it. I just certainly want to put in here, it's, what I have found and what I want to, and had some of this experience and saw others have it more and continue through motherhood is, yes, there's healing and yes, there's like the hard part and having the pain and what that, but we're not, we need to talk about that. Like you have transcended moments, that's why, the subtitle of my birth, Rewrite the Mother Code, is From Sacrifice to Stardust, a cosmic approach to motherhood. It isn't like, oh, you have, like, it's like evidence-based cosmic motherhood, It's like all these things, of what happens when we, really tune into the right side of our brain. This is physiology. This is in our brain that connects us to a loving universe, allows us to see how connected we all are, that, takes us out of the realm of just our physical pain to, moments of seeing that pain as a portal to something, beyond our conscious awareness, and that can kind of seem a little scary almost, or like, oh, what it,
A little woo woo.
and a little woo woo, right? But what we are learning more and more is, woo woo is just another label put on something, that's just right next door, right there with our feminine intuition, with our, these not always, so obviously seeable, but are real, you know, real. I always like to share when we start talking about this. I had the privilege to spend some time with a woman, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. And I highly recommend her work from the standpoint that we're talking about. It's like, how do you kind of keep growing? How do you stay with yourself? She was a neuroanatomist. Her second book is called Whole Brain Living. And I got trained in her model and coaching. And it's so pragmatic. It's so, like looking at your brain and how it functions, because a piece of how it functions is that, I'm going to use the word spiritual, but however that, comes up for you, but that kind of more expanded space that like all is well, we're all loved, it's a loving universe, the more expansive thinking, it's in our brains. She had personal experience. Was something she was studying, then had a personal experience of it, then came up with a framework for it that, I use in my coaching. And it's really so valuable when we can identify these different areas of our brain and see who's talking, right? And give all of them, as she calls it, the microphone to have their say. And that can really help us through some of these doubts, some of these fears, some of the outside, chatter that we may have inside of ourselves, to give it a bigger perspective and make it a choice that, comes from within us. inside of us. So we'll make sure and put her in the show notes too.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my
Make a
gosh.
note.
I love this so much. I think those transcending moments are they start as unfamiliar, right? The first time you have one,
Yeah.
you're like, what was that? And then the more that you can kind of tap into that, the more normal and comforting it feels. So don't run
Mm,
from that, you guys. This work is
mm,
deep and it is hard and it is a dedication of time. It takes time to get to the version of yourself that you're trying to be. So don't be discouraged too if you feel like you've been working at it and you're not quite there yet. As long as
mm.
you're making that forward momentum, you're making that movement in the right direction, then
Yeah.
you should be tapping yourself on the back. Don't compare yourself to others either, not in how fast you get there or how long it takes you or what your traumas look like. Okay, Dr. Gertrude, I feel so like replenished after this conversation. It just made me
Mm.
feel lighter. I feel good. So thank you for
You're so
that.
welcome.
Oh my
Oh my
gosh,
gosh.
this is
Yeah,
amazing. Before I tell people where they can find you and connect with
sure.
you, I want to hear more about your book. What's it about?
Yeah.
Who should read it? And where can they find it once it hits the shelves?
Yeah, thank you. HeHe. I really appreciate that because this is my first book. I call it my fourth child, and my third child, I have two daughters, and my third child was my doctoral dissertation. That was a birthing. And this is a birthing in an all itself. And it's one of the things I love to do is really open that space. And it's something, that is a through line in the book, even though, it's focused toward women who are considering motherhood. I use the term sometimes mother curious,
Oh, yeah.
to and actively engaging, in conception to, they have children, but looking at this from the standpoint of we all mother, that everyone mothers. We conceive, create, give birth to careers, relationships, dreams, ideas, and yes, children. But the most important person we need to mother is ourselves, right? So, it kind of takes us very much, there's so much of what we talked about today, that's in the book. It's really there to open our minds, open a space. And I really want to invite women to tune into themselves, be willing to have the courage to ask questions, to, not be paranoid, but question everything, like, kind of have that, like, things, if everybody's doing it, does that make it right? If, oh, I'm so uncomfortable to think about a home birth, for example, because we were just talking about that, but I kind of like it. Like, how do I go about that? So I go into and what it takes to rewrite, what are the mother codes? So what are the cultural codes, the family codes? How are we wired? What does it look like to identify those? And then how do I rewrite it and come up with my own mother code that I can follow? And within there I talk about cosmic codes. Those are kind of the ones that we can start tapping into once we're in this kind of line of thinking and being, more with ourselves so that we, have moments of presence. This isn't, we'll never, live fully in the moment 24/7, but oh my gosh, like if we can touch that space, at moments throughout this and not, kind of just get through it. So women who are considering, that's, my sweet spot. Just like you said, I have such a heart space for that because I love women considering this and what's ahead of them and being mindful about it. And you mentioned something like, oh, you may have, of course you had this like experience you wanted to like love a child. Like I didn't even question it. It was just like so in my program and like you get married, have a baby, get married, have a baby. Like I didn't even, it was an unexamined yes, as I call it, right? And sometimes it's a no. So anyway, it's all about the exploration and then how to have some of the things that we're talking about. And I really want to equip women, whether it's everything from waking us up to, going deeper on the journey that you're already on. So I
Oh
just
my
said so
gosh.
much about it.
Yeah, no, I
Thank you.
love
So I get
that. I'm
excited.
sitting here being like, all
It's
right,
coming out.
in a pre-order for this book. I've got to get my hands on this.
Yeah, so mark your calendar because it comes out officially May 6th, but it will be ready for pre-sale the first week in February because I'm doing a TEDx talk in on February 2nd in Ojai, California. So we definitely wanted it ready, and available to pre-order uh, when, given that, exciting thing that I have going on that day. So, yes, in the meantime, I would love to have people connect with me and get on, my mailing list where I'll be giving, all the information about things coming up. And you can explore all the things that I do, coaching, immersive experiences, retreats here in Mexico, all the things on my website, www.dr Gertrude Lyons. And I think the last thing I'll say, I put up my first online course that I love because it's
Congrats.
also thank you. It's in an arena that I think we also don't look at, which is exploring. It's called Journey into the Dark, which sounds kind of like, oh my gosh, why would we go?
Ooh.
Yeah, like what does that
Where are
mean?
you going?
I know, but it's exploring myths that we have around, the dark, because the dark is actually the feminine. And so it's a whole journey into this feminine aspect of ourselves. And all of your listeners can get an 11% discount by using the code HeHe, HeHe, which I'm sure they all know and love very much. So that's something, that someone can grab immediately. But anywhere, I'd just love for you to explore it and
Oh
have,
my gosh.
I'm sure any listener of yours, I would be thrilled to have in my world as well.
I'm biased, but they are a pretty cool gang of people. I do
Mhm.
love them dearly. Dr. Gertrude, thank you so much for being here. Truly, this was, dare I say, a cosmic conversation. This was
You
so
can
good. I
say it. You can
love
say it.
it. I feel it in my brain. I feel it in my heart. I can feel it in my core. I just like feel it all over my body. This was an amazing
Mhm.
conversation. Thank you so much for coming on here and talking about these kind of topics that we whisper about, but we all know that we should talk about them because they will help us be better. They will help us live easier. They will help us feel lighter. And we're going to be happier people when you start to put yourself first. And like you said, not in a selfish way, but in a, if I put into myself, I can better put into my family type of way.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, listeners,
What a
thank
blessing.
you.
So love being with you, Hee. Thank you
Oh
so, so
my
much.
gosh. Thank you for being here. And listeners, I will see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow Dr. Gertrude on social media, and you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I truly do value this community and I love hanging out with you. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent. It's an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you found today's episode helpful, share it with a friend. Share it with someone who could use evidence-based information to help them have an informed and confident birth. I'd love to hear what you have to say and read your sweet words. By leaving us a review, you are helping other expectant mamas and their families find the podcast so that we can reduce birth trauma and improve maternity care in the U.S. one birth at a time. If you're interested in joining the Birth Lounge, go to thebirthlounge.com. If you want to connect with me on socials, you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe on all platforms. Until next time, stay educated, stay supported, stay confident. Bye.